The foggy Albion has been on fire with riots since the end of July. Classic 5 o'clock tea. The prim British now prefer good old protests, which often, almost always, end in riots and clashes with the police. The geography of the People's Rebellion covers the whole country, and in some places you can even see generations of Catholics and Protestants who have hated each other, standing side by side in a united anti-immigrant surge. The police and the press somehow call all these people on the streets far right, but that's putting it mildly. But the Prime Minister uses even harsher terms.
These thugs move from one city to another. Police measures are necessary, including movement restriction orders for those found guilty, so they can't even board a train. We act similarly towards football hooligans.
How anti-immigrant protesters became thugs and football hooligans in the Prime Minister's eyes is an interesting question. And such statements clearly won't boost Starmer's ratings, especially since people are demanding justice and protection, not a continuation of the policy of ignoring violence from migrants.
All the news is only about far-right riots and protests. But what about the little girls? These 3 beautiful girls were killed for no reason. And we still have no answers.
Just 10 years ago, such an incident would have been considered a terrorist act in the UK and all over Europe, with corresponding reactions, consequences, and punishment. A 17-year-old son of Rwandan migrants carried out a real massacre in a children's dance studio. 3 girls were killed, and more than 10 children with stab wounds were taken to hospitals. However, in the realities of 2024, the attacker is seen as an ordinary criminal. The reaction of the British public is naturally one of rage.
Today, the ground of London will tremble under the steps of patriots. We are all coming out today for our unborn grandchildren, our unborn children. We must make our country safe. What's happening is already too much. Children are dying, little girls are dying on our streets. What will happen now if the legislation doesn't change? We will call for demonstrations in every city in this country until they listen. They must protect the children, that's all.
The authorities keep reminding us that the attacker of the children, an Afro-Englishman, was born in Wales. He's almost one of us. But what does that really change? The statistics are harsh. Children of migrants are generally more susceptible to radicalization, especially since newcomers often don't integrate into society. No matter how much money the authorities allocate for this integration, they live in communities, befriend, and communicate only with their own. Meanwhile, in such ethnic enclaves, unfortunately, street crime flourishes and the law is absent. The police are even afraid to patrol such areas, but dispersing those dissatisfied with the lawlessness with batons or setting dogs on them, that's no problem. Meanwhile, the current Labour government is only adding fuel to the fire. They plan to legalize all those who entered the country illegally through continental Europe. And even without that, according to the census a decade ago, migrants from Asia and Africa make up about 13% of the population. How many there are today is impossible to estimate. It's no wonder that native Britons have decided to take the law into their own hands.
If we consider this specific incident, which essentially became a turning point and triggered the violence and disorder, it revealed a much more serious problem that existed and was latent. And this is the tension you see today in many countries, including the USA. Feelings of nationalism are emerging, a sense that people are abandoned, that their freedoms are denied, that the nation's sovereignty is under threat. And much of this coincides with the rise in immigration and the cost of living crisis.
It is noteworthy that the authorities and the police have sided with migrants and naturalized subjects of His Majesty, who, by the way, are wreaking havoc on the foggy Albion, harassing whites in their neighborhoods, forming armed gangs that march with batons and machetes against those protesting against them. Muslim men are calling on social media to come out and put white people in their place. The media reports with concern, and Elon Musk on his Twitter page predicts that a civil war in Britain is inevitable, and he actively comments on the actions of the authorities. In a negative light, for this he is already being threatened by Downing Street. They say his platform's businessmen are inciting racial hatred and violence, and for that, by the way, you can get a real prison term in Britain. The UK authorities remembered this and decided to act accordingly.
This will be a very powerful signal to everyone involved in the riots, both directly and on social media. You will most likely be dealt with within a week.
Repressive measures were not long in coming. The number of arrests has exceeded 700. Half of them have been charged. 120 activists have already been jailed. Sentences for participating in the riots are around 3 years. But for posting information online related to public disorder, you get more than 3 years. The most high-profile sentence is for 30-year-old Jordan Plain. He was sent to prison for 8 months for mimicking a monkey in the presence of Black and Asian people. The international community is oddly silent, and the police report the identities of several hundred more suspects have been established. They will be arrested in the coming weeks.
You will not get away with this unpunished. You were caught on body cameras, surveillance cameras. Frankly, you are being shown on national television. You will be arrested and jailed for years. The public must know that there are consequences for such actions.
The high-ranking British officials should also think about the consequences. The current crisis has marked the beginning of the end of the once Great Britain, which for decades methodically tried to destabilize the surrounding world. And it turned out that it changed itself beyond recognition. Olga Davidovich, main broadcast.